So my entire life, I've heard stories about how I was basically just considered the most beautiful just because I was the palest. I was a baby. I had no feet. I was bald. I didn't even have hair.
So if a child is wearing the Disney clothes, they're just like, oh my God, this little kid appreciates Disney movies. I wish he didn't have to endure all of this. Like, okay, what if he appreciates Arab movies? Like, would you want him to die?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tea with Mint. This is the podcast where we discuss different topics of life from an attempted and nuanced perspective of two women living in the Middle East. Today's topic is interesting to both of us because it's a little philosophical but very important. And for me, at least, it also stems from an increased awareness of the cultural impact of colonialism on the Middle East and how that affects our daily lives and the way we think about ourselves. To get started and be clear, we will be discussing and giving a few examples on more than one aspect or area of life where we think Arab culture has been affected by colonialism. But before we jump into our episode, Lean, what are you drinking today?
Oh, well, I'm drinking iced coffee, and I actually had cream espresso even before then, but like for the session, I had to have some iced coffee with me. And it's actually not some, it's a lot of iced coffee.
So I'm also drinking iced coffee because you've turned me on to coffee now. Not just now, you've always turned me on to coffee, I think, for a while now. But yeah, this is, I think, the first episode where I'm drinking iced coffee too. To get started, Lynn, how would you feel like you would define cultural colonialism?
Yeah, I think I would define cultural colonialism as anything related to consumerism as well. Like, I define it as stuff that is cultural, like stuff that like comments that I see from people commenting on people's appearance and people's ideals and morals and identities and stuff like that. But I also kind of, the more explicit way of that I see it is like through media that we consume, or through anything that we buy or we watch or we bring into our house, whether we hear it or we buy it or we use it or we eat it, especially if that is something that becomes kind of like a normal aspect. And if I feel like other people look down on people who do not follow that Western part that entered the house.
I would define it somehow similarly and a little differently. At the same time, the way I see cultures is that they are supposed to be equal in importance. I find cultures to be just like different cultures to be just different ways of life, and one should not be deemed or judged to be better or worse than the other. And for me, cultural colonialism is when those feelings or like superiority and inferiority comes into place of like whether a culture feels more superior or less than the other culture, and it starts to affect people in their everyday lives. And I think we don't realize how much colonialism has affected us and the way we think about ourselves. And to me, that's cultural colonialism. It's the fact that we're recording this podcast in English. This is part of cultural colonialism to me.
I was
It's
just thinking the same when you were talking. I was like, the fact that we're recording it in English.
exactly. So cultural colonialism for me is when a culture is deemed better, or a practice from a culture is deemed superior or inferior to another. And cultures should be seen as equals, just different, and that's okay. I mean, difference is needed in the world, and different cultures are supposed to be different, but they're not supposed to be better or worse than each other. Maybe there are certain aspects that can be like improved upon, but I think that's up to the people of that culture to also like make a new culture out of their old culture rather than, something being imposed or so. My next question would be on this topic is why do you think cultural colonialism is continuing longer after, you know, at least in the Middle East and the Arab world, long after the physical colonialism was over and after our countries gained independence and were like their own governments and everything. Why are we still culturally colonized?
So I think for me, and this might be like a kind of controversial take on this, but I think colonialism, cultural colonialism, is the tool that all colonial powers leave behind when they leave a country. So it's kind of when colonialism happens, they start imposing this, whether intentionally or not intentionally. Like I think one aspect that is really apparent is like in every country that was colonized by Western powers, white becomes people who are white in Arab countries are presumed to be better or prettier or more cultured. I think that's because when the colonizers were there, these people who are white, it became kind of associated that white means power, and that continued being there even after they left. Like now that like status is not equal to the skin color, but we still presume it is, and there's still racism's happening, even though in the past olive skin or dark skin was associated with like fertile land. So why are we associating these things with negative connotations? It's because these tools were kept and they want them to be kept, and like even now they still kind of control the way that we see the world, and we kind of start associating Western values as being the correct values and our values as being backwards. And that just means for all the Western powers that we are in check. We agree and we want whatever world direction that they're leading. And so that's the way I view it. I don't think it will ever leave. And I think another part of why it's not leaving is kind of like a technical reason, because the media and like technology and everything is like in English, or like in English lettering, English programming, like even programming languages, they're not in Arabic, they're not they're in English letters. So I think that's a reason why. I think I was watching this podcast called Thamania. It's a very famous podcast and became very famous in the Arab world, and they were describing the reason why it's really hard to find good and famous and high quality Arabic podcasts is because technology plays against us. And like I see this as a graphic designer, it's really hard sometimes to like create stuff and make it Arabic and make it pretty and make it beautiful while still maintaining the Arabic calligraphy style, let's say, in a technology that was not made for that. So that's the technical reason, I think, for why this is happening. And unless there's like a big change, then I think this will, or like something to bypass that this will always be an issue. But I think from that portion of things are kind of changing and things are going in a better direction.
I think we agree on that. I think also very similarly in this perspective. For me, colonialism, when it comes, it not only imposes a new culture or new values or whatever, it also works on erasing whatever already existed. So I feel like when people gain independence from physical colonialism, that doesn't mean that they will automatically be able to remember their own values that they had before the colonialism, and they will just go on living the way they are already living. And so that also includes thinking that the white race is better, or that they are more enlightened, or they have more education, or that they just have more knowledge, and knowledge equals power in this world, apparently. Which it does, by the way. Like it does. And I thought we could discuss this topic by something that you already touched upon, and that's just like from the outside going in. Just about how we think about ourselves physically and what that means and what beauty standards have evolved, and just like how we were viewed in those times versus how we see ourselves now. So, do you want to?
Yeah, I think other than skin color and stuff like that, you can notice it in clothes as well. You can notice it in like I think even in one thing that I really noticed in Jordan, which I think I don't notice as much in countries where there are so many different ethnicities, but when it's the same ethnicity, it really shows up. Is the fact that their clothing really kind of indicates what social class you're in. And if someone is in a different social class but dresses in the way of the lower social class, in quotations lower, I don't agree with that, but people view you differently. And one thing I noticed, and I think I might have told you the story, but going into shopping centers wearing my I wear like a jilbab or like a abaya, like a long abaya, colorful abaya. I would get looks from the people there, kind of considering like, why are you even in the same shop that I'm in? And the other person would be like more Western type, you know, like they have like blonde hair, they dyed their hair blonde, and they're wearing like more Western clothes, and their mannerisms are more Western, and they kind of sneak in English words in between every word they speak. And like it's very apparent because even I kind of start judging the people. Like even though I'm wearing the same clothes, if I see someone wearing a abaya or wearing jilbab in Jordan, I kind of start looking at them like, oh yeah, these people are not like me, or these people don't think like me, which is stereotypically kind of true, but it's also something that we created, and because of that, people started inserting themselves into the bubbles that they most relate to. So yeah, I think it's very interesting how even people who wear hijab in Jordan, like there are different types. There are people who are more fashionable, and that kind of indicates they're in a different social class than, or like more colorful, let's say, than other people. And then the people who are more traditional or more let's say they're dressing in a different fashion sense, more tame fashion sense, they're considered to be a lower social class. And I think it's very interesting because that kind of like goes over the skin color, which we cannot control. Like if someone wants to get out of their social class, they start dressing up in a different way, and like their mannerism change, and the places they go to change, and also like the fact that in Jordan, like local stuff in general are very available. But if you want to see people who are more affected by cultural colonialism, then you have to go to places where they have more Western boutiques and Western shops, and that's where you see the people who are very affected by cultural colonialism. And it's really weird because Jordanian, you know, clothes boutiques or food shops, or like the materials there are really good, but still like it's kind of funny how we colonize ourselves by still wanting to have that Western effect on us. But yeah, like even for me, like subconsciously, this is how I view it as well. Like if I see some clothing that's like like the very famous clothing names, I'm just like, oh yeah, that seems like good quality clothing. And if I see something that doesn't have a tagline or like a specific name, or I don't know the name, I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm not sure about the quality. Like why is the name affecting the quality, even though some stuff that are locally sourced and or even like Middle Eastern clothing and clothing materials are probably going to be better, but just because they're and cheaper as well. But we're just like looking for more expensive and less quality clothing because of the name.
Yeah. But sometimes it's not even cheaper. So if you want like something that's like traditionally handmade, it's not cheaper at all. And we still think, well, if it's an Italian handmade designer, then it's so much better than an Arab
And
handmade designer, or like just because this woman is working from her home and just like doing every stitch by herself by like one artist, whereas this is in a massive workshop by Dior or whoever cares. And it's like so annoying. And the thing is,
true,
our
actually.
clothes most of the time look better. Not only that, but are more often than not also being culturally appropriated by these big brands and bigger how designer houses or whatever you want to call them. So it's just, but I'm kind of glad that this is changing. I'm kind of glad that we have more Arab designers who are also doing more traditional clothes now. And I'm really glad how it's also getting more traction
Yeah.
in the Arab world, at least. Like more people are wanting to dress just more traditionally for their big events or and I think that's really, really important because not only does it allow us to keep up with our tradition, but it also allows us to relearn our traditions in a way of like, especially like Jordan, Palestine, this area, we have like very specific stitches and for each area, and it's so nice to like relearn how like the specific stitch for this area is and this
And the
specific stitch for
symbolism as
this
well.
region is. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say when you were talking about the how like traditional stitches and stuff like that are sometimes more expensive, and like it reminded me of like when we would go shopping for traditional like let's say like I want to get a dress or like traditional Jordanian or Palestinian hand stitched one, we would be very weary of like buying it and paying good money for it. Whereas if like let's say I find a Western brand that seems like good quality and like it's in fashion right now, I might be more willing to pay the same amount of money for that, but I would not pay for hand stitching, which I know takes effort and knowledge and like, high quality. Like it's hand stitches like are
And,
way better than machine
and
stitches. Like
time, some of these dresses take a year or two to make to finish stitching.
yeah, exactly.
Like imagine like you're paying just like 1,000 JDs or 1,500 JDs for somebody's work over an entire year. Like that's the only if they don't have another income, that's barely getting them through 2 months of like life in Jordan.
And I think it's because also like now part of like the culture is fast fashion and people want to be dressing in like 50 different dresses a year, or some people don't wear the same dress more than once. There's like people have seen me in this. And I think that kind of affects the way we consume and the way we buy stuff. And like our cultures, they're very sustainable because the person who like a woman would get like a dress when she's married, a dress when she's a girl, like a woman, a young woman, and a dress when she's in when she's a child. And like she would get like maybe three dresses that like are really good quality and like a winter dress. But like if you can't all count all of them, there would be like 20 dresses and like undergarments as well that would be like more consumed throughout the years. But in our like right now, the culture, even like I'm talking about every culture in the world, but I'm just kind of relating it to my culture. Like I know people who would rather buy like stuff from fast fashion Chinese websites and just like wear so many outfits a year, and like even if like the dress or like the shirt that they buy would tear after the first
Mm.
time they wear it, they're just like, it's fine, I wore it once and it looked nice. But like for me, and this is something that kind of makes it hard to shop, I would want to get like one garment that stays with me for a long time. Like some of the clothes I own like stay for 3 years plus because they're high quality, and people don't see the value in buying something that's more on the expensive side for it to be more sustainable. And I think that's related also to cultural colonialism, like capitalism, and the fact that we have to be making profit off of the things that we do all the time, and the fact that we have to be consuming all the time. And I think it affects the way we look at everything.
The other day I was looking for dresses because my sister's getting married. So I was just looking for like in small boutiques here in Jordan about like for something to wear, maybe like a nice traditional dress. I was like looking for something, but I was looking for something on the cheaper end, not necessarily because I can't afford it. And also because there are alternatives of like you can get that hand stitched like look, but it's usually just done by machines and it's cheaper. So it's not really, again, going back to not just like consumerism and everything, but also or sustainability, but also just like good working conditions for people. So I was looking through, some of like the boutiques and I followed a few. So the thing is like when you're looking at these kind of things on Instagram, you start getting ads for new things that are similar, normal. And I started getting these ads and seeing all of these different ads for different shops and boutiques. And whenever I would like one, I would just like follow that boutique as well because like I still haven't decided what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go for shopping or whatever. And one of the ads I saw, it was like a jacket that is very like the stitching was so nice and it was so very clearly Arab inspired. But I go onto the page and it's a German brand and
Not German
you only
Arab,
get
like
it in
German.
Germany. No, like German.
Oh,
Like,
interesting.
and you can't even get it like shipped worldwide or anything. Not that I would want to. Like, there are similar, maybe better options here in Jordan, but like, it was one of the accounts that I was gonna follow. So like, it was an ad. I clicked on it. I went to the account. I saw. I was like, oh, that these are so nice. I'm just gonna. But I'm like, this is weird. Like, why is the language weird? Like, why isn't it in Arabic or at least in English? Or like because I've also seen some of these brands who are like in the US, they're like we ship worldwide or like we're here for our Arab US girly. But this one was like completely German. They only ship to Germany or like across Germany, and it's a German brand. And it's like it's very clear like and it only sells like jackets and they're all stitched and they're all like stitched in patterns that are very clearly Middle Eastern and Arab. So to me, like that just like I was like kind of honestly just angered me a little bit.
And the fact that we're probably gonna see like a famous influencer being like, yeah, I bought this from like this famous boutique in Germany and like it's so good and like they make Middle Eastern patterns. Whereas if like the same brand was in like the Middle East, she would not even look twice at it.
Yeah.
Because I've seen this happen and it's really annoying how we view the same, like even if it's the same exact thing, if we see like a famous brand doing it, we're just like, yeah, yeah, now I want it. Like if you see it like 2 days before that, you're just like, no, this is tacky. This is like the way we used to view how traditional dresses were tacky and like that they indicate a certain social class. And then once a famous person did the henna night, everybody started doing the henna night as well. Like, how do we view? We should start. Like, I think in a very
Yeah.
beautiful world, we would view it independently, and we would be very proud of our traditions. But because of we live in this sort of world, everything is controlled by who does what, and if they do
Yeah.
it, I'm gonna do it as well.
But honestly, I'm glad for these like influencers or more famous people in the Arab world who are reinforcing these traditions because I feel like they are increasing the awareness to this cultural colonialism that's going on. Like they are helping us find beauty again in our tradition.
I think the reason why I was very kind of not mad, but like I don't like the reason why I agree with you. It's a positive change, and the fact that these influencers did these things have made this positive change. But I still think it's made for the Western point of view. And I have an example for this. I have a colleague of mine at work. She had a henna party for her brother's wedding, and she was very proud about the fact that she was wearing a traditional dress, and like she was like speaking about it. And a week later, when the wedding happened and some people were wearing the traditional dress, she started negatively commenting about them as if, why would you wear a traditional dress to this kind of party? And I think it made me realize that most of the people still hold negative connotations to that kind of thing, or like the traditional dresses being worn, and they still view it. And because we have this thing in our culture where farmers versus city people, and it's still there. And I was shocked because it was like a week before you were very happy about wearing a traditional dress, but because she wore it in a very different setting where we're still adhering to Western values, you did not like it. So I was like, that's not the way that I view it, and the way I was viewing how these famous influencers did it, I was like, that's a positive thing. But when I saw how they viewed it, I was like, most of the people are still doing it for the Western perspective.
Yeah, I think also like people nowadays do feel more okay or more like, oh, I want to wear a traditional dress for my engagement party or my henna party, but not the wedding. Like my sister, the same. Like for her engagement, she got a more, I don't, it's not like even Jordanian tradition. It's like Moroccan thing.
I love
And for
this.
her henna, she's thinking they're very nice, yeah. But for her henna, she was thinking she would like do a more traditional Jordanian Palestinian thing. But like for the wedding, she's looking for a completely Western European style dress, wedding dress, whatever. So I do get how that people are still don't see that a traditional dress is more still appropriate for like their biggest event or like their big, like maybe a big event, but not the biggest. So it's like still not good enough to get there, which is
I just
honestly absurd, but
Yeah, I agree. And it's so interesting how I think most cultures, including our culture, I think married women, they wear like the red and black dresses. I think, I'm not sure if it was red, but I think they, like, weddings are associated with the color red. And even in Sudanese culture, they're associated with the color red, and many African countries, which is very opposite to like how the Western views it, like related to the concept of like white. I don't know why it's linked to the color white, but maybe like concepts of
you
purity or
don't.
what. I think
I
maybe concepts,
also
yeah,
virginity.
which is very funny considering how Western values are now. Maybe they should wear something different at this point.
Mm,
Yeah, it's
that's why
kind of
a lot of women in the Western world nowadays are like, if they're doing a second wedding, or like they're getting married a second time or whatever, they opt for a not so white dress, like maybe like a champagne colored dress or a rose, because they're like, well, that ship has sailed.
thing also related to that is how we have important concepts of women's purity from Western cultures into our culture.
Going back to like just regular beauty standards and skin color, and like is considered beautiful in terms of features and all of that. Like I just want to say, like, or tell a few examples of like from my own life, because I grew up being the palest one in my family from both sides. So my entire life I've heard stories about how I was basically just considered the most beautiful just because I was the palest. I was a baby. I had no feet. I was bald. I didn't even have hair. My mom would like just tell me stories about how people would react when they see me for the first time, or like how my step grandmother basically was like, oh, this girl was very clean, because I was also the first in my immediate family, at least, who was born outside of Jordan, still in the Middle East, but you know. And the comment from my step grandmother was, this girl was clearly born under different lights, like just because I was so pale and white, and to them that was like, oh my God. And before I even opened my eyes, everyone was like, oh, she's gonna have blue eyes. I don't. Just because I was like so pale and blonde, and or like bald at least. But like
Bull.
people just like assumed. And also because we do have blue eyes in my mom's family, and we have like blue eyes and green eyes. So they just assumed that I would have it. Sorry to disappoint. But at the same time, I'm not sorry, because I feel like, except for the way I dress, like I could literally pass for white or another ethnicity, mostly white. And the thing is, like, I thought this was gonna end when I was like a baby or whatever, but I hate it, because like if you grow up in a Jordanian family and you're the palest, you kind of become the beauty standard that everyone is whipped against. So like if a new girl is born, they're like, oh, she's not as pale as Sarah, she's not as pretty. Yeah, like imagine, or like one of the guys in the family would want to get married, and they would go and comment on the bride, or like whoever he's going to see, and compare her to me. The horror, exact.
Just for those of you, of course, nobody can see me, but I'm literally putting my hands on my face out of horror at this.
So I just like grew up just resenting the way I look and just hating it so much that like I can't even accept. This is why I hate it so much when somebody tells me, "Oh, you're so pretty." Like, don't comment on the way I look. Just don't. Can you not? I don't
It's
care
funny.
anymore.
It's kind of the opposite for me because, like, my grandmother from my mother's side, she's very white, and like she's kind of like white to the point that she's kind of red, you know.
She is a redhead.
And no, I don't think so. Yani she's more, yeah, maybe, yeah, true, kind of, but not anyway. But my grandmother was very white, and my mom is kind of white as well. And so my mom would never consider me to be pale or white or whatever. I was always considered to be like olive skinned, which I don't mind. But it's funny because when other people come from the outside, they're just like, yeah, your daughter is white. And like even when I was at
Yeah, you are.
university, I was like at university, all my friends were kind of like a different ethnicity, and they were darker than I was, and I kept assuming that I was the same skin color as them, and they'd be like, "Lean, we can't even like," because I studied animation, and like they would draw me, and they're like, I can't find the exact shade of like pale that I want to do, and I was like, guys, like I have the same skin color as you guys, and it's like it's such a stupid thing to even care about, but because of the fact how our society was made, it's like something that becomes like a hyper fixation of society on you. And it's like still like when we go to our to my mother's family, they still don't consider me as like white because we have whiter people, and it's such a stupid thing to even like look at. I have, because my cousins, they were born to they were very, very white, like they're like white wall white, and like if the sun comes on them, they just die. Like not to that extent, but literally like sunblock is like in their hand. So like for me, I can tan and I can, I don't burn, as I do burn, but like not to their extent. But that's why it's like, it's so funny how this became something, or like this becomes something that we notice so much in our society. And it's just because of the fact that older generations especially care about it so much. I think also, as you mentioned, like marriage checklist is like, she needs to be white, she needs to be tall, and she needs to be thin. Like these are the three standards, guys.
Blonde.
Yeah, I'm just like, marry a refrigerator, guys. Perfect solution.
Or like go to a white country and
I mean, they
like,
wanted to.
If that's like what you're looking for, be my guest. But like, don't come to a regular Arab family and expect that's what you're gonna find. Like you could find that, but just because, again, we've been colonized physically and our race got mixed up with so many other races, and I feel like our race is so diverse in terms of like skin color and eye color and everything, and features, that you would find literally every shade in the book. But at the same time, don't knock on people's doors just looking for, I mean, don't be stupid.
Seriously. And the fact that, at the wedding, they're like, yeah, I chose her for her religious, like, if you like hadith, the famous hadith about how women are getting married you get married to a woman for her religion, for her, not her purity, but like the fact that she comes from a good family, and you marry her for her beauty. And if you chose the person who has a good religion, that's like you chose something good. And then at the wedding, like the person, literally the only things on his checklist were appearance wise, and he's like, yeah, I married her for her amazing religion. Like, don't lie. But that's the thing. Like, it's like there's a clash, I think, between, of course, like everybody has a type. I have a type of like someone who I would find good looking or pretty or whatever. But the fact that many people in our society choose these things because they associate that with being the perfect choice.
But like, because sometimes I don't even think it's just the men. Sometimes it's the women. And like, and the thing is, like, you would think this is just like older generation, or just like my grandmother and my mother's age, and like these are the people who are looking for the white, blonde, blue-eyed girl. But the thing is, while I was at university, other girls in my batch would just come up to me and be like, Sarah, and I'd be like, what? And they'd be like, where are you from? And I would say, I'm from Jordan, like you. And they'd be like, but you don't look like you're from Jordan. Is your mom not Jordanian? Like, I'm like, where would my mom be from? Of course she's Jordanian. Like, I don't know. Is she Russian? Is she German? You're studying German. Is it because your mother is German? No, my mother is also Jordanian. My father is Jordanian. My mother is Jordanian. They're both from a city in Jordan, the same city actually. And it's like, the thing is, like, the other day, I even heard my own mother bragging about this. She was like, because like her family is known to have height, like most of them are really tall with like wide bones and really more Western body structure, and they're really pale mostly, and almost all of them, if like the majority of them, not all of them, but the majority of them either have blue eyes or green eyes, because my grandmother had green eyes and my grandfather had blue eyes. So it just makes sense that their kids would just be like either or.
And what's
so
funny?
My mother was just like the other day bragging about how she said that there was always like a rumor, or how everyone said in their village, that their family, that there was probably like they had like a British ancestor from colonialism days in their family, and that's why they're also like pale and blue-eyed and green-eyed, and I'm like, that's nothing to brag about. That just means there's something wrong. What kind of British ancestor, and how did they enter the family?
This is something that's always like my grandmother always says, like my father is more dark in appearance and my mom is whiter, and she always mentions, and it's funny how this is so normalized, even though it's not normal at all, but she's like, we brought you to make we wanted him to, like, that's not the reason my father married my mother, but this is the reason my grandmother was like, yeah, this is a good choice. Was because she's like, we brought her to improve the outcome of children. Like we brought
Genetics.
so that she could birth whiter children, and that's improving the product. This is what my grandmother says, and this is not something that like only my grandmother says. This is something very normalized in our society.
Yeah.
White is associated with better, other than degrading like the fact of like pregnancy and birth and all of these kind of aspects, but also like the fact that we kind of view becoming more white as becoming more improved. It's nothing to be I cannot stress enough how much of like how negative it is, and how it's as you mentioned, it's really more enforced by the women than the men. Like the men could care less about these things, and then you see like the mother coming like, I'm sorry, my son is way too handsome for you, or like he's too white for you, or like we're not gonna do this to ourselves or something. Like,
so everyone who knows my family knows like my little brother is much darker. Like I'm the whitest person in my family, like across like both families, even extended family, and he's not the darkest, but like one of the dark. And he's like my little brother, like just like a few years younger than me, so immediate sibling after. And just for context, if he were to be put in a US context, he would probably be seen as a mixed kid, or like half black, half white, or black, for context of like what his skin color looks like. And my mother, when he was born, the first couple of years, she would say, thank God he was not born a girl, because that would just mean that he was just never gonna get married, because
oh my
nobody was ever gonna
God.
find him beautiful enough.
True, because we know these people, and the son was born whiter than the girl, and they always comment on it, and they're just like, she's gonna have such a hard life because her brother is so much more prettier than her. And I'm just like, you guys are making it hard. You're the ones commenting. Just stop commenting, and then everything will be fine. And like even my cousins, like when we visited one time, we visited my grandmother. She kept on like mentioning her appearance and mentioning how her brother is more whiter than her, and he has. I cannot remember if my cousin has. I think he has colored eyes, but anyway, that he's more whiter, and that people are just gonna comment on it. And she kept commenting on it the entire time we were there, and I'm just like, how sad. And like I'm not even blaming my grandmother, because I'm just thinking of the society that created my grandmother as well, and the society that created this outlook on life, and how she faced these things when she was younger as well, is probably the reason why she comments so much on them. But because we as a generation are more, we're like, we notice these things, and we kind of like know how wrong it is, you realize that you have to stop this cycle, but that the older generation keeps on reinforcing it to the point where it's really hard. Like for me, like I noticed these comparisons and these like ways of looking at myself, and I would like to stop it for the younger generation, but like the older generation still kind of holds it strongly. And even I think in African countries, whenever like northern Africa, like Egypt, Sudan, Maghreb, Morocco, and Tunisia, like when they're like, yeah guys, like not only Middle Eastern like not only the Levantine area has white people, even in Sudan we have white people, we have people of every ethnicities. And I'm just like, I wish we live in a world where that did not matter, and where that was not associated with, even now, garnering sympathy for world events and stuff. We always garner more sympathy for people who look more white, who dress more westernized. And like even right now with the Gaza conflict, if a child is wearing the Disney clothes, they're just like, oh my God, this little kid appreciates Disney movies. I wish he didn't have to endure all of this. Like, okay, what if he appreciates Arab movies? Like, would you want him to die?
I also just wanted to talk about, like, when it comes to like physicality and things, is like how back in the day and during colonialist times, like Arabs and Arab women and even like men were seen in an exotic way, and how that, or just like the Middle East in general was seen in an exotic way, and how that has affected the way. And I think there are still stereotypes to this day that do stem from back when we were colonized, especially like, oh, the Middle East is rich, or the women there are oppressed, and they need white men to save them from Middle Eastern men. Can you please? Oh my God, like this is so present, like especially now in Hollywood media, and just like whenever you watch a series with a Muslim character, like no, my eyes hurt.
I think that we have to tackle, now that more Arabs and more Muslims are getting into the media, of how to view Muslim women in a way that's respectful and in a way that portrays realism. Like there are, of course, people of different ways of thinking and people who view the world differently, even if they wear the hijab. but making it respectful and making it realistic, and also not using it to spread propaganda more against Muslim women. We're already dealing with so much. Like honestly, like even though alhamdulillah my experiences of flying to like Western countries and different countries has not been affected in any way, shape, or form. But the fear of going to a Western country and like dealing with the way people think about the way I dress has been a scary part of traveling. Even if I don't deal with it, the things you see on TV shows, you're just like, yeah, this is how they're gonna deal with me.
So going into another cultural colonialism affecting our daily life, the next thing I wanted to discuss was education and just how we see, number one, how anyone who's white and they could be like the least educated person in the world, and we just, oh my God, they're white, they look white. They know more, they are more educated, they are worth more, their knowledge is worth more, even though they probably have less knowledge or less practical experience or less whatever. And even I think, at least in Jordan now, this has been a pattern where if you have, for example, a PhD from an Arab university or a Jordanian university, and you're looking for jobs at another Jordanian university, or even the same university where you studied, you would not get it. Like they would very clearly, they would be like, oh, here's a PhD degree. And then the next day they would put out like a vacancy announcement where we're looking for a professor with a PhD degree, no need for experience, maybe like 1 or 2 teaching experiences, which you probably had if you had, like maybe. And then one of the conditions would be like a graduate of the US or the UK, or like, and you're just like, oh, that's what I studied, but I studied it here in Jordan. So either you don't apply at all, or you apply and immediately get rejected just because, well, you graduated from Jordan or an Arab country or a Jordanian university. And if you don't have confidence in the education that you're giving, then why give education at all? And why have people waste their money getting these degrees that are completely useless, or that you're making completely useless because you're not employing them? Like nobody goes to get a degree because they want to just stay at home or like just hang it up and not do anything with it.
I think like with the exception of like if it's like a very specific degree, I faced the same thing when I was looking into continuing my master's. All of my Western professors told me to get it elsewhere, and elsewhere meant outside of the country, and most of these professors were actually Western professors. So it's funny, even though they were Western professors teaching in an Arab university, they still thought that the education system, because it's in an Arab country, would not be as high quality as the same education that you would get in a Western country. And you know, that's the thing that I don't understand, because you know, like you go to Korea, you go to Japan, and they're also like Asian countries, there's pride in the way that they view their educational system, and they're like, yeah, it's really hard to get into this specific university in Korea or in Japan or whatever. Like I'm just like throwing names, but there are other countries as well. And then you come to our countries, and like even if it's like one of the best universities, you can tell that the employees there, the people who are working there, you cannot seniority level, like if you're Arab, even if you're from the country that's like, you know, the country where the university is, you are still kind of viewed less, and the seniority level really depends on what nationality you get. That's like British or Australian or American. That's kind of like guarantees that you will become more senior in level, followed by other Western countries. I'm just mentioning top 3 because they're English speaking.
And just to add on to that, like I worked at a university, and the first year and 6 months I was working at a very educational like department. It was a very small department also, made up of mostly Jordanians. We had like one person who was Western, and whenever I would go to do like transactions or whatever with like other departments at the university, I would not be taken as seriously, and I would need to go talk to my boss to talk to them so they would take the matter seriously. Whereas the last 2 months I moved to another department, and this department was the international affairs department, or the international office in a lot of universities. It's called also the international office, and it's basically made up of a higher percentage of Western employees. And also the director of that department was of a Western nationality. He was bad, not as bad as a person, but like bad at being a boss. Like he was a bad manager. Like he was a kind person, but like he was really bad at his job. But like just the fact that I was from that department, that other departments were taking me more seriously. And I coordinated a very similar program in this department that I had in my previous department. And I had things done for me on a faster level, on a more serious level. I was just completely shocked by the change of demeanor to my request from other departments that are supposed to be like there to also just serve every department in the university. So we're talking about finance, HR, and the whole thing is because Westerns do at that university do have more power somehow, even though we're at a university in Jordan, a governmental Jordanian university, a public university, and Westerners still had more power because everyone, in other departments would be afraid if they didn't do what I asked them to do. I would go to my boss, who was Western, and my boss would go to his boss, who was also Western, and that boss was just prime president of the university, or like somebody who could literally make life a living hell for them if they decided, oh, this person is not acting like they should. So it's just, like in the previous department, I would need months to get something done. In the newer one, probably like a couple of days, months versus a couple of days. I was happy about it because it made me get my job done faster. But like the fact that we were almost racist against ourselves in that situation, just we just gave more regard to a Western employee, even though he was just an employee, just like the rest of us, and he could get fired just like the rest of us.
I think maybe it stems from a subconscious way of thinking about it as well. Like this person, he's like from a certain Western point of view. They need things done on time. They need things to be done tidily, and it kind of reinforces this thing that we don't care about time. We don't view time as more important, and their time is more important because of the way that they view life and stuff, which is not true at all. But I think this is something that I always see, and I think it also lowers the quality in a way of Arab companies. They're just like, yeah, you run on Arab time, which is not true. Even if Arabs kind of they have a different way of viewing time, that doesn't mean that their time is less important than other cultures, and that doesn't mean that they would very much not care about getting a certain document on time, or that they're used to this kind of way of thinking. But I think it does really affect the way that we deal with other nationalities as well, and I've kind of felt that with my work as well, dealing with people who are from different ethnicities. You kind of start thinking, oh, I should act in a different way, I should act in their way of thinking, us Arabs, and you kind of like start kind of being like getting these comments about yourself from yourself.
The next thing we need to discuss is, well, we don't need to discuss it, but that would be interesting to discuss, is just literature in general, and how also cultural colonialism has affected literature, who's at the center of it, media portrayals, and everything in between.
I don't know, first I was thinking about like books, because we started with literature, but I guess how that also translates into media shows and like TV shows and movies and stuff could also be applicable. With like literature in general, I think this is something we have always discussed, because we have like interest in like publishing and stuff like that. But I think it's two things. One part is that Arab literature has always, and still very strong, but because it hasn't aligned with new design trends and new ways of like marketing itself, it has been kind of backward in a way. Like we started not seeing it as much, and also people in our society, I think they've sensed that change, and so that they haven't been reading as much literature in Arabic or like Middle Eastern literature. But I think in general, as like when I was in my teenage years, I haven't read a lot of Arabic literature because it was just so far apart from the culture that we grew up on, like the Western culture that we grew up on. So to read something that's very far away from that was very hard for me. And so I think that's why I grew up, I was very affected by Western media, because when I started reading, that's where I started getting into Western culture. That was the start for me. And then like, of course, that translates into media. Like I know more about Greek mythology than than I know about my own like older cultures. And even in education, I think that's like a big part. Like when we were studying social studies in our school, remember, like we would get so much into like Greek mythology, and then when we get into like Islamic literature or Islamic culture or whatever, when we were reading about it, it would be like one chapter encompassing everything that's like happened. And then with like English, it would be like Greek and Roman and all of the societies that happen.
Also, just going off of what you said about the way that just Western literature has been marketed, that I feel like for a while, even the people who wouldn't read in English and they would still read in Arabic, they would still read books that were translated from English for a very long time. And so the majority of reading, even if you were reading in Arabic, you were reading from Western authors and Western perspectives and Western viewpoint. And I think it also affected the way even Arab authors write and the way we tell our story. And I think
True.
like I've been
Like the
doing some
traditional
research.
plotline.
Yeah, and I've been reading some research about like how different different cultures tell different stories, and about like who's the center of the story. And generally that collectivist cultures tend to tell a more collectivist story, whereas individualistic cultures tend to tell an individualistic story. And I think we've been seeing more of a, like, I don't think I can remember a modern story that was written in the last 10 years or so that is written in a more collectivist way. At least not any that I've read, or not any that I was told about, at least. So there's usually just like one hero who goes through an adventure, and it's like very westernized, very like individualistic, that one person's story. I think just reading stories that are just told from a more collectivist approach would also, for me, just gave a bigger impact. And those tended to be older stories for like, or older novels. And I think that does affect how we also think of ourselves and our cultures. And I think it also just changes the way we think of what is valuable in our society. We start to value individualist features more than the collectivist society, and it does affect the shape of a society and how we think of each other. And how I think to a certain degree there was a time where we were more resentful toward that collectivist culture that we had. And I think media and literature and the things that we were consuming had a big effect on that.
Right. I just remembered when you were talking about it, because I studied animation in university, and I remember one of my professors was kind of like telling me how I should talk about the narrative that I was animating, and how he was viewing it from a very American perspective of a savior and a teacher, and how like someone who's wise would become a hero, and then the person coming after him would learn from this wise person. And it's a very individualistic way of looking at things. But what I noticed when he was talking about it is that he just viewed it as a very normal thing. He didn't kind of take any moment to consider that there are different ways of talking about narratives and view, and the concept behind things could be more individualistic or more collectivist. And it's fun. That's why I think like in education especially, the people who are teaching have to be people from the same culture, like, because I think our culture is very rich in stories and storytelling. And for people, I think white people in general, they just assume that their culture, especially I think Americans in general, they view that their culture is the culture, is the only thing that makes sense. So he didn't even consider there to be any other form of narrative that can be told. And even me, I noticed that like a couple of years later, not even in the same year, because the way we learned about animation and storytelling, we were looking at westernized versions. We're looking at Disney, Pixar, we're looking at DreamWorks, we're looking at the plot line where there's like a peak and a drop, and then like, the final finale of the story. And even that is very westernized, and it's a very like it's a style that's not unique. And like, instead of kind of researching these storytelling, we just took it as like, yeah, these people made it work, and we're just gonna take that and apply it to our stories. Which, yeah, true, like sometimes you learn from people who are experts, but also like looking at films made by like amazing people in like the Arab world, and like Persian animations and animations from other places in the world that could be studied to learn how to tell stories. And we have not exported our way of telling stories to the world. We're just taking the Japanese version, we're taking the American version, we're taking the Western version, and we're not kind of introducing our own way of storytelling, which is it's not linear at all. I think our storytelling is not linear, and it doesn't focus on one person. It focuses on the society and what happens, because we like to tell history, and our culture is very rich in history, poetry, and like we have a lot of symbolism in our storytelling. Like right now I'm reading a story, literally it's Palestinian story about something, but it's a very unique concept, because it's talking about a guy who has a camel, and the camel grew a palm tree from his back, and the palm tree had land on it. And I just want to know what it means, and I'm just thinking that there's a huge symbolistic value in that.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is what we should introduce,
Nice.
and this is is what we should export to the world.
I think we would also just give a better representation of our characters and our pull, going back to stereotypes, especially about Middle Eastern women and how we're oppressed or whatever. I think if more people were to read Arabic stories, they would know that women in the Middle East are anything but oppressed. If anything, more often than not, they're the actual leaders of the family, and they're literally the glue that holds everyone together. And like they have a bigger role to play in society than Western media likes to portray them to have. Or even I think Arabic media. I think Arabic media is not doing that well right now in a lot of ways. I think we could do so much better, but I do think there are certain stories that I've read in Arabic that tend to be older again, that do portray like a proper role of what a woman means in our society and what a man means in our society. And from this, I wanted to quote an article titled How British Colonialism Determined Whether Your Country Celebrates Halloween. And this was written by Max Fisher and was published on the Washington Post. So, and it was published in like 2013. So it's a pretty old article, but I always thought that there was this really interesting notion in it. The whole article does talk about cultural colonialism, and different countries celebrate Halloween just because of British colonialism, basically. But the very interesting part of the art, and I'm gonna read it now. Victorianism spread more than Halloween skepticism, of course. Social scientists who study Africa and the Middle East and South Asia often argue that these regions are today some of the worst societies in the world for women and for gays, because 19th century British colonial overlords ingrained their legal systems and social codes with those very Victorian ideas, and those have persisted. I mean, it's also a very Western perspective to say that the Middle East and Africa and South Asia are some of the worst societies for women. Still a very Western perspective, and I don't necessarily agree with that completely, because I sometimes see that Western women are sometimes more oppressed in Western societies than women are here, for example. But I think he just presents a very interesting notion of how the gender roles and just basically British colonialism has also imported its own sexism into the Middle East. And I'm not saying there wasn't sexism in the Middle East before there was British colonialism, but I don't necessarily think that it was this bad.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned before, the Western values of like what a woman and a man should be and how they should act and traditional roles and all of these things, and the way Western morals dictate whether, and like values dictate whether or not women in the Arab or Middle Eastern world are oppressed or not, are not the same values that we use to dictate that. Strong women for us are different than strong women in other places in the world, and I don't want them to agree with, and that's why we're different. But what I hate about Western ideology is that it dictates everybody who's different as less than and worse than other people. So if I cover up, and Western value says the freedom of a woman is by choosing what to wear, but what she should choose is what Western value and morals dictate. So it's not necessarily being free. I'm not being free by choosing Western values. I'm also held to a certain standard by Western values. So that's my point. I think every ideology and every Western value, but the thing is that Western value is always dictated by how much freedom you can get. And I feel like this is in its essence by itself is wrong, because there is no such thing as total freedom. But for what they hold us to their standards, and when Western media kind of starts dictating the same thing to us over and over again, we start taking their moral values, their way of looking at things as the way that we should look at ourselves. So now, a lot of societies, unfortunately, they do see women who cover up as being less than. They see them as less educated. They see them as more oppressed. And I think a lot of that comes from Western society in general. And I think the way we also view people who are covered in our society as more, also like more religious, more pure, more whatever, is also like imported from Western society, because I don't think that was the case. And or like being more shy is better for a woman, being less loud is better for a woman. This is not Islamic, this is not traditionally like there, but because Western society kind of dictated these things, now they tell us that we are backwards because of values that they enforced on us in the past. And I think also a lot of the values of like being shy, being in the house, being away from society came because our region has undergone a lot of wars because because of Western countries, and in it women became very vulnerable, and they had to do these things, and these rules and societal standards became more needed because of the things that they underwent. Like in Afghanistan, I think a lot of the things that are happening right now with women and how they are kind of like just put in a different place in society is because they literally were under the war. Like if I was a woman in Afghanistan and there was a war and you hear about stories of rape, of course I would want to stay in my house being protected. Why is it so hard to introduce logic and compassion when talking about Arab and Middle Eastern societies and how their realities have enforced the way that they live? But when you look at Western society and how they're so free, but also their freedom is also dictated by certain rules and directions, where if you wear less than a bikini, you're looked down upon, or like you're shaming other women for wearing a bikini. That's their society that we have to look up to. I don't think that's fair for them to do to us. Like one example I always remember is how in Japan they had so many cases of harassment for women in train stations, and so they started introducing female-only train stations. And Dubai or the UAE or like other places in the Arab world already had these rules, but Japan was praised for doing so, whereas when people or Westerners visited the UAE or like other Arab countries that had the same rules and conditions where like families are separated or like women get to order in a different section in restaurants, for example, in Saudi, they were criticized for the same thing because they don't want values to stem out of religion. They don't want values to stem out of tradition. They want values to stem out of necessity. I think this is, first of all, it's very double standards, because like if you look at any Western society, their morals do stem out of religion. Even if their country is not religious, their morals have to stem out of something. They don't just stem out of a logic, because logic changes over time. And I can just tell you right now, like stealing is a bad thing, but if stealing is necessary for someone to do something, then they will change the rules. Like they have done it, they will do it, and they will do it over again. But for us, because it stems out of religion and stems out of religious values, they don't agree with that. And that's why we will always be in conflict. But where it becomes very dangerous is that when we ourselves as a society kind of start conflicting these two values together. And I think this is in its essence is what Western colonialism in the media or cultural colonialism is it's creating a clash between the values that you grew up with and values that do not work with your society. And then you still get criticized for it, you know? Like when our society becomes very consumerist, they're like, yeah, our people have so much money that they just waste. Well, it came from you. Now you're blaming us, of course.
Yeah, but I think that for us to get out of that, number one, we do need the awareness, and number two, we kind of need to like get rid of that victim mentality of like we don't have the power to redefine our values and redefine our society and redefine what is important and what is not important. And I don't think it's going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to be one person's effort, because it needs an entire society to do that. In some ways, I think we're on the right track, and then in some other ways, I think we're just going off track. So I guess only time will tell. Just one final question to just wrap this up. We kind of started the episode saying there is an increased awareness about this whole thing, but we're culturally colonized and how we're trying to get back to our roots and redefining what is really valuable for us. Where do you think that increased awareness came from? Or what is the fire that ignited it? Do you think it's like one event, or is it like a series of events that's a long time coming, probably about time we're starting to wake up to this?
Do you want to start?
No, go ahead. It's not something that I have an answer to. I'm just theorizing about.
Yeah, same. I don't know. And the thing is, like, yes, some people are waking up, but like not everybody has woken up. But I do think in general, like we have been waking up slowly because of, I think the main thing is international law and international community and the way that there's such a double standard that we have always seen in everything, especially in the issues that are happening right now. One example that's not even related to that is like women's rights. We have been dying about women's rights. Everybody's like women's right this, women's right that, women's right to get pregnant, women's right to abort, women's right to get a husband, women's right to own stuff. Like, thing is, these are all important things to discuss, but like as soon as stuff happen in the Middle East, or actual issues that relate to women and children happen, the world turns a blind eye. And I'm talking about not the people, I'm talking about the communities, the international community. And it's such an annoying thing. Yeah, because, you know, you grow up and you even take these values and you hold them because you have been fed all your life. So you start seeing this community, this international community, as better even than the community that you have in your own society. Then you start realizing that no, actually, first of all, their values do not always apply to everything that we have in our own society. And maybe we have something that applies better in our own society. And even if we are not applying that value, that doesn't mean that this value is not there. And you start kind of looking into your own culture, your own society, when these things happen, and you find that all of the things that you maybe viewed in a negative light before are actually things that work better for you, and maybe even for the world. Like, why do we always say, like, yeah, you know, like some values are better, work for the, maybe our values are actually better for the world. Like, why don't we just start viewing it like that? And I think that applies to everything. Like, why can't our values be exported to the world as well? And that's the question that I think will be the turning wheel for so many people, when we start viewing ourselves as good, ourselves as like as having good values and good things to export to the world, rather than just import everything.
I think I just want to like add to that we're not necessarily saying that our culture or our values are perfect, or that they're better than anyone else's, or that they're going to work for everyone. But at the same time, are each society taking a conscious decision about the values that are important to them, as opposed to just blindly following the values that may not fit that specific society or that specific person for themselves. Again, it's not about, and it's also just about questioning everything. Even if you think that your culture has a value that doesn't work, or that's not good, or that's really bad, then also question it and replace that with a better value. It's just, it has to go with human evolution, whatever you want to call it, and like just our society's trying to be better, and always trying to be better.
When inshallah we become better and we improve, I don't think that we should associate that with us taking other people's values. I think we should associate it with us creating our own standards, our own values, our own moral compass, rather than saying, well, yeah, you know, like this certain Middle Eastern country has become better because it has taken on more Western values and morals. And I think that is, even if that country becomes better, I think still, like, the reason it became better is not something I would want to take on, because I don't want to become like other people. I want to maintain my identity, and I'm talking about, like, you know, collectively. I want to maintain my identity, my moral compass, my way of thinking about the world. And honestly, if I'm proud enough of something, why not export it to the world rather than importing it? This is literally, you know, like how people are talking about the American dream. They export it to the world. Why can't I export my Arab dream? You know, this is the way I'm thinking about it as well. You know, unless we become proud of our culture and start finding value and meaning in our culture, I don't think we're going to create the basis for a better society in the way that we would be able to maintain.
I just wanted to add, like, when you mentioned the American dream, also is like just cultural colonialism and unconscious bias that I didn't know I had against myself, and an inferiority complex that we have in the Arab world. But I worked with international students, and I was just as surprised when these international students, the semester would finish and they would be like, no, but can I get a job and stay here? And I'd be like, why would you want to stay in Jordan? Like, it's not a great place. But it is, honestly, it is for so many people. Like, people here are really welcoming, they're really respectful. They don't, I mean, unless you're talking about the stupid few. Also, it's a very safe country. Like, apparently it's like the third safest in the world or something. Like, according to a study that they did a couple of years ago. Why have I convinced myself that Jordan is not a great place to be in or live in? It is. And that's why when people come here, they very rarely want to leave.
Exactly.
But I mean, economically, we're not doing very well. Maybe that's
but that's the thing, like, that's what I feel like they try to kind of export, like show this idea of the American dream, whereas literally people who go to the US are just like, I want to go back, I want to come back to my own country. I want to, and when you spoke about safety, like America, safety, school shootings, people just shooting random people in the street, like, I'm sorry, what is the American dream? Literally, people who go to New York, they're just like the rats and the smell in the streets. Like, This is like the experience you get, or like when you go to Paris. Like, I'm sorry, but like, can you tell me what we're looking for in these societies? The fashion, the pretty pictures. Like, I'm not
It's
saying
just
I'm
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you said initially. It's all a marketing strategy and whether you're able to market. I think our cultures are less
we're
are
more
not
modest.
marketing. They're or like more more modest, but also we don't have as much control over like soft power, like the media. I think Jordan is doing well now or better than it did like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But like especially within the Arab world, within countries that speak Arabic, because I think it's like we have a bit of a better media and like productions and movies and series, and but eventually we don't have as big of a soft power in terms of like exporting our media into also other cultures that are outside of the Middle East or the Arab world, and that does affect the narrative because they still get the power of like creating these stereotypes about us and creating these narratives about the Middle East that most of the time are very inaccurate and just very harmful and honestly just plain stupid. Like they make no sense. So do you have anything to add before we wrap?
No, I think I really enjoyed this episode in general. The ideas were very structured, and
I
yeah,
feel
I
like I'm getting
think
feedback.
no, but I think it's a really interesting topic to discuss, and there are so many different things that we don't necessarily think about so much, and we just live with that we're kind of waking up to and seeing how they really affect us and how they have affected us for such a long time. But I think the first step in any solution is actually realizing there is a problem. And so seeing this problem is an interesting way of solving it, you know?
Well, thank you all for listening, because I think like Lean wrapped it up really well. And I'm sure there are so many aspects of this topic that we have not discussed or we have not like even touched upon. But if we realize there are more down the line, we're able to specify a few more. We can always make another episode about this. But yeah, thank you for being here and thank you for listening. And this was Tea with Mint, and see you next time. مع السلامة.
Bye.